even just one thing that I can do can make a person feel heard or help a person get rid of a memory or something like that.
Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions.
I am so pleased to welcome all of you back. Women We Should Know is a platform that was founded on my love of women that was born from my grandmother, who was an old suffragette, and I carried it with me through all of my years. I find women fascinating, interesting, intelligent, savvy, and incredibly courageous. And so we formed this podcast to be able to bring you the voices, the courageous actions and innovations of women whose names you might not know, but you might want to, because they are out in the world doing audacious things to uplift other women, to support children, to create initiatives that are so much needed that just haven't been thought of before, or maybe someone thought of it and didn't do it. These are the women who are doing it. Today, I have someone I've been wanting to meet for about a year and a half, and I finally got to. Yay for me and yay for you. Dominique Sepowitz, PhD, is a social scientist, and she is focused on developing innovative research and methods to research emerging social issues, especially those affecting girls and women. She is a nationally recognized expert on human trafficking. In 2018, Dr. Sepowitz presented a TEDx called Hidden in Plain Sight, Sex Trafficking Next Door. Now, where I'm going to put the name of that TEDx talk in her program notes, so don't be scurrying for a pen. Don't worry about it. It'll be right there. You'll be able to track it down. She is an associate professor at the Arizona State University School of Social Work and the founder and director. She is an associate professor at the Arizona State University School of Social Work and the founder and director of the ASU Office of Sex Trafficking Intervention Research. She leads initiatives working with partners including law enforcement, social justice providers, social service providers, survivor support organizations, and much more than that. Dominique is also the clinical director of Phoenix Starfish Place, a HUD-funded supportive permanent housing program for sex trafficking women and their children. We're going to hear a lot more about that. That will be in the program notes as well. She is the principal investigator on numerous state and federal grants, and is a co-principal investigator on a 5-year National Science Foundation grant exploring illicit networks that facilitate human trafficking. Dr. Sepowitz is on the editorial board of the Journal of Human Trafficking and has more than 35 peer-reviewed publications. In 2019, she was interviewed in the PBS Frontline documentary, Sex Trafficking in America. And yes, that'll be in the program notes too. I am thrilled. I am profoundly honored to be able to bring Dr. Dominique Sepowitz to speak with you today. Hi, Dominique. How are you today?
It's so great to see you, Leslie. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. As I said in the introduction, it's been a year and a half. Well, you probably know because you've gotten my periodic emails. It's been a year and a half that I've been wanting to meet you. She and I were introduced by a mutual friend. So it's finally happened, and we get to be here today and discuss something that weighs heavy on my heart and has weighed heavy on my heart for decades. There are many heavy issues that I want to discuss today and many critical issues. But I have a tradition. I always like to start every podcast with something light by asking the guest, what is not in your bio that you would love people to know about you?
I make jewelry, and I have a wonderful gaggle of friends that I have loved forever. So I'm a good friend. I have two beautiful children. They're 10 and 12. They are the light of my life with my cute husband, Brian. I think the most important thing that I haven't said in my bio is that I'm just like each person who's listening, that bravery and courage to change the world comes from within, and that each of us have this tool, but not everyone has the same tools. So I'm really excited to talk more with you and learn more about women that you want to know.
There we go. When we spoke last week, one of the things you said that really captured my attention and my imagination is that this is a really exciting time in the world of development of sex trafficking, anti-sex trafficking initiatives. Explain to me why it is an exciting time.
So sex trafficking is really emerged in the United States in the year 2000. We had a federal law that was passed that gave the language of sex trafficking not only to foreign-born victims, but to people who are in our country. And it really started this initiative and this conversation about trafficking. Prior to that, we used words like prostitution and sex workers very casually. And soon after 2000, we started to develop an understanding that this was a situation that many people didn't want to be in, and that they needed help. And we had to build an infrastructure to recognize it. We had to build an infrastructure to provide support. And we had to talk to a lot of people, including survivors, to say what would have helped if this existed before. How can we do this right? And so in the last 21 years, we've really had tremendous progress. The federal government has really stepped up a lot of the financial support for grants and so on. It still isn't anywhere near what it should be. Thinking about the domestic violence movement that started in the 60s and 70s, how much more time the domestic violence movement has had to build infrastructure, shelters, supports, therapeutic things, laws, orders of protection. We just don't have that kind of structure quite yet for sex trafficking. We have disparate housing programs. We have some therapists that know how to talk about it, but most don't. It's not identified in jails or prisons, but we have all of this will. We have all of these wonderful people who are interested in getting involved. I have a dozen students a week reach out to me and say, I want to make a difference. What can I do? And we really believe that you can, collect bras and help provide support for our clients, all the way to going to Congress and asking for better laws. There's a huge range of things that we can do. And there's a lot of will. There's a lot of eagerness to protect children and to understand what's really happening.
Well, that's wonderful. And we will be putting some of those resources in the program notes. You're going to hear me say the two words program notes a lot because we're not going to be able to cover all of the important topics, but we are going to make it available to you. As you are moving forward, everyone speaks about the sex trafficking of children, which is horrific and unforgivable. But something you made me aware of that I really hadn't considered, to my embarrassment, I had not considered. And that is the trafficking of adults.
We work really hard in our community to keep children safe, and that's the United States community. That's not just here in Arizona. That's not just in New Mexico. That's all over our country. And people do have a heart for children. We're more likely to get people to care about it and listen. Although schools are a bit hesitant to have us come in and talk about sex trafficking, that still is an interesting barrier. But what we find is that kids grow fast, those long days and short years. And so very quickly, we have an 18-year-old on our hands who's been very seriously traumatized, has very few social supports, no money, no education, really traumatized, and we just don't have any infrastructure for them. So we're really working hard, including Phoenix Starfish Place here in Phoenix. It's the first like this in the country. There's one in Minnesota that has some similarities, but we just don't have that infrastructure for women who are trying to get out. We have absolutely nothing for men, and certainly transgender persons have an even harder time to find places. So we recently did a street outreach out on our track where people are prostituted in our community in Phoenix. And we worked with 52 people in 2 different events. We gave out medical care and mental health support and got them engaged in case management. We did HIV testing and really loving, supportive engagement. We had survivor leaders doing most of the work, really connecting. And 30% of them identified that they were trafficked as a child. So we know these were now people living on the street, doing prostitution out of cars, really struggling day to day, lots of substance abuse. We know if we don't intervene when they're children, where their life leads, but we just don't know how to intervene better. And that's some of the things that we're working on.
I'm disappointed to hear, not surprised, but disappointed to hear that the schools aren't more cooperative. I just over the weekend read of an individual who apparently had been, pardon me, I don't have the right language, but recruiting, is that the correct word?
That's it.
Recruiting on one of our social media apps.
Yeah.
And was using the handle puberty support. And apparently a whole throng of people on that social media app saw it and called the FBI,
Wow.
did their own research, tracked this, I'm just going to say it, this just scumbag down. And he received a knock at the door, let's say. But when we have kids, and this is just the reality of our world now, when we have kids on their own smartphones, on all these social media platforms, all day, every day, and it's my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that this is one of the prime areas for recruitment and for establishing contact. What is the justification that the schools, or the rationalization, let's call it, that the schools are giving for not wanting to help to educate these kids about what to watch out for?
It's a super question. Well, let's go back to social media just for a quick second. So
Sure.
the pandemic certainly has changed social media for lots of families, and many of us felt that we didn't have a lot of choices during the pandemic. That was the only social contact. And there were reasons that kids were on computers in a really disproportionate number compared to the year before. So traffickers are very smart. They're looking for people who are feeling sad or vulnerable, need drugs, need money, looking for something. And so a puberty helper makes perfect sense. They're looking for people to tell them their sadness, and they're recruiting them. So we find traffickers on social media. We find traffickers at bus stops. We find traffickers at coffee shops, at malls, anywhere that kids go, that it feels pretty natural to have a conversation with them. And what we're hoping is those kids know better. And it's really difficult. Last week, my 10-year-old received a sext message, 10 years old, from another 10-year-old. And she lost her phone for 3 months because she didn't tell me about the message. And this is the work I do every day. I mean, she certainly does know what I do and why I'm worried and why I watch her text messages. But that's vigilance, right? I didn't actually catch it the night she got it. I caught it the next morning, and she could have been asked to run away with someone that night, and I may not have caught it. It's very complicated So schools have some hesitation because it's sexual material. If we're not
Mm.
letting sex ed in, we're not letting sexual
Oh,
predator.
don't get me on my soapbox about that. Honestly.
So we have a plan, of course. We innovate. So
Mhm.
we have a beautiful website we developed that's nationally oriented. It's not one city or state, called Project Starfish Education, and it's a training site for schools. It has materials for parents, teachers, social workers, principals, school nurses, everyone. You can get an online training. You can get a certificate. You can fill out a school-wide policy of what to do if I see this. So we take that no, and I don't really take no for an answer. I'm going to say, well,
I bet you don't.
try this way, right? This feels much more comfortable. Plus, I'd much rather a teacher be telling their students about trafficking than this nice white lady coming in. It's much
Yes.
more important that it feel relatable to, that she or he or they know the learning methods for those kids. And so really it's putting the tools into the classroom, into those teachers' hands. And so we think that model is a pretty easy one. It can be in any school, 7th to 12th grade in the country,
Mhm,
free.
mhm, mhm. Well, it makes sense to me.
One of my girlfriends who's a survivor here in Phoenix works for the Girl Scouts, and they have a program with kids whose moms are behind bars. All
Mm,
those are very high risk kids for being trafficked.
really?
Um,
Why is that? Let me
so
just
it's
interrupt.
so we see some intergenerational propensity for trafficking. We see that if a grandmother was trafficked, that the daughter is brought up in a similar situation, exposed to similar risks: poverty, drug and alcohol
Makes
abuse,
sense.
family violence, predatory people.
Mhm,
Then she's trafficked, and then she has a daughter, and that daughter is trafficked, or boy. And so we see quite a lot of our clients, probably about 20% of our clients, have an auntie or someone in their community, their family,
mm,
that had been trafficked, and they kind of knew about it, or people didn't really say much. And I think some of that is the shame that we
right.
bring into this conversation, that people are very ashamed to talk about that type of trauma. We've really come a long way with sexual violence and domestic violence, but trafficking is a secret. And so in families, if it's kept a secret, but the vulnerabilities aren't dealt with, we're not keeping those kids safer, we're not putting them in better positions, we're not getting them better educated, that we're really just recycling the same risks. And so we
Mhm.
see it generation after generation.
And I know another issue that you are faced with on a daily basis is there are not many researchers in sex trafficking.
Right. So we just do whatever we can. I mean, we realized, I started doing this work in about 2003, and then I looked around, and there was one conference and one researcher in Toledo, Ohio.
One.
One. And now they're on their 17th conference, and I have gone every year except for the 2 years I had babies that month. And so we've become friends. All of the majority of the researchers that do this work, especially in social work, there's some researchers in criminology who look at it very differently, from a perspective of how the criminal justice system can change. And we're very victim-centered social workers. And really for many years, we did what good social workers do. We worked with the victims and tried to help them heal. And then at some point, about 8 years in, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't just work with the victims. We had to figure out what was happening, and try to stop it,
Right.
how to intervene. And so we started doing things like placing sex ads online and tracking who was calling us, and understanding how big the business was. I mean, when you realize there are 78,000 people a day trying to buy sex in your community, it
Okay,
does
let's
get.
just say that again. I don't want any listener to miss that number. 78,000 people in your area trying to buy sex every day. That's
Online.
huge.
Just
Online.
online, not
Oh,
even
okay.
including the streets. We don't count cars.
Thank you for correcting me. 78,000
And that's looky
people.
loos, right? Those are people who are clicking on a sex ad and thinking about it. And then there's
Mhm.
another 50,000 that call that number. And then there's probably another 30,000 that might try to make a date and show up. And
Mhm.
so we know the market is robust. We know that there are many, many more buyers than any police department could ever catch. Some
Right.
of the buyers are people in our leadership, people in our administration, people
Yes,
in
they
our
are.
government, people in our law enforcement, people in our medical establishments. So
Yes.
there's lots of reasons to keep this going.
Right.
And so we started looking at buyers. We started trying to figure out who it was, what are they doing, how often are they doing it? And it was very difficult because buyers are everyone. They're all races, they're all economic groups. They might be a day laborer and a surgeon, big variation, all marital status, have kids, not be legal, not, it didn't matter, which makes intervening nearly impossible. So in
Right.
my
And
community,
I want to just point out another thing, if I may. The word buyers, the first time you said that, and it was today, it just, I maintain my composure here, but in my mind, I thought buyers, because we think about perpetrators, we think about pimps,
Mhm.
we think in these terms that are more coarse. And I suspect my instant processing wheel turned. I suspect that using those terminologies actually makes it easier to ignore. When we take it down to that basic consumer level, these are just buyers, the way you would buy, well, anything.
A couch.
Oh, now we have something that really could touch people just in language education.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to interject
No.
that. That was
And
my personal realization.
and here's an example of the couch. So I just did a study a couple years ago. I'm working in Hawaii as well, and we placed some sex ads here in Phoenix, and we found about 45 calls a day. 45 men called us in one day to buy sex from one ad that I placed with photos and language that were borrowed from law enforcement, or we had models take some pictures. 45 people a day, but there were 350 other sex ads that same day.
Oh my
So then we
goodness.
took that similar ad, went to Oahu. There were only 58 other ads. In 24 hours, I had 409 people call me
Oh
to
my
buy sex
gosh.
from me. Some of them called many times, but 407 individual callers. So I have a couch. Say my neighbor gave me a couch. They're moving away. They give me a couch and it's beautiful. And I take a picture and 407 people call me to buy the couch. What am I going to do? I can only sell that couch one time. But I can sell a person over and over and over again. And if I have 407 potential customers, I could get 6 more girls in there, right? And keep them busy all the time. They would never even be able to serve 407 men in one day. So
That's a really brilliantly shocking and horrifying analogy.
So traffickers are no dummies. They know where the market is. They go to communities that don't have law enforcement looking. And then they go to places like Las Vegas that is just overwhelmed by the problem, that law enforcement just doesn't have the scope to do the work. So you can earn $200 a day in Albuquerque, but you can earn $2,000 a day in Las Vegas. But you might get caught in one of those places. And so traffickers are always trying to make decisions on where the heat is on, what to do, how to keep her or him or they away from anyone who could support them, hide them, make sure that there is as little public exposure as they can, except of course for street prostitution. And then there is that public exposure.
Of course. Do these, what are they called? The traffickers, these traffickers that have, well, let's say numbers of individuals. Do they interact? Do they network with each other? Is that how they stay aware of what is a hot area or what is not? What is hot in terms of law enforcement? What's hot in terms of business? Or are they so competitive that they don't have that interconnectivity?
So there's some competitiveness. We've definitely worked with many victims who talked about a person pretending to be a buyer would come into the hotel room and they really were another trafficker and tried to kidnap them or something like that. We've heard that many times. So there is this internal competition. We know that about 1 out of every 5 traffickers was a gang member. Now, are they a gang member now? Not necessarily, but were they? Which also tells us that there's a lot of violence in these experiences for the victims.
Right.
And so we don't know if there are these big networks. That's what that National Science Foundation grant is about. We're trying to learn about if people are solo operators. Do they work with a couple of people? Are they big networks like drugs, right? So drugs, you have to move from place to place, but again, you can only sell it once, but you need a pretty big distribution network.
Right.
Traffic, you don't need as big of a distribution network, but you do need to know what the market is and where the market is. So we do hear from law enforcement partners that there's chatter online,
Mhm.
in social media. Oh, the cops are out in Orlando. Oh, the cops are out in Oakland. It's getting hot
Mhm.
here in Kansas
Mhm.
City. So there are certain circuits that people sort of travel where their trafficker knows sort of the places to sell them.
Right. First of all, they're going to have more scouts looking out to protect them, but there's also, I see a greater potential for if you could get one of the big players, and they might,
Yeah.
they might trade
But
50
remember,
50 years off their 300-year sentence in order to sell out
maybe, but
competitors.
if you snitch, you get stitches, right? Snitches get stitches. It's a pretty serious crime within the life
Uh,
of
I see.
the
I
snitch. So,
see. I see.
and
I see.
and I think that it is a little bit looser than we give it credit for. So we had a bust here in Phoenix the other day with 42 men that were caught in a fake massage parlor. Our police department set up a fake massage parlor, and all of them solicited a sex act. And one of them was worked with homeless young people, right? And there were other
That's
ones that
devastating.
professionals absolutely ruined his life.
Absolutely devastating. Now, what is in speaking on this topic? I have one more question in this area. You used a term when we spoke last week, illicit networks.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
So illicit networks talk about criminal communities like cartels or larger networks of people who move people or move drugs. And so sex trafficking is very different than human smuggling. And that's something that's been really complicated in our definition because the word trafficking insinuates movement, and there is no
Mhm.
movement required in human trafficking. You could be in a hotel room and never move and be a human trafficking victim. The things that make it human trafficking are that a person is using force, fraud, or coercion for sex
Mhm.
trafficking to exchange sex for something commercial. Over the age of 18, under the age of 18, if you have sex with someone for a sandwich and they're an adult, that is sex trafficking. That
I
sandwich
see.
buyer is a trafficker. You cannot buy sex from a child in the United States. So there's no sex buyers of kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Once you become an adult, you have to prove that you have a trafficker. You have to prove someone is using force, fraud, or coercion.
I see.
Smuggling is bringing someone across the border, whether they're paid or kidnapped, and that's simply transporting people across a span of space.
Mm.
So they're quite different, and those are things that we were really talking about a lot in our community, the difference between those two, because some of our last administration used the word human trafficking for everything at the border. And really,
Mm-hmm.
human trafficking is only sex and labor trafficking. When a child is brought across the border and they're an unaccompanied minor,
Mm-hmm.
they get swept right into the Office of Refugee Resettlement
I see.
programs, and we never see them in our community. They're not prostituted or trafficked in our community. We see domestic born victims trafficked by domestic born people.
I see. I see. Well, I'm glad to know that
Homegrown problem.
there's one
Yeah.
group of kids that are safe. It's a hard issue, and it's a big issue. And one more thing on the trafficking is I did not realize that labor trafficking until I spoke with you is such a monumental issue in this country.
It is. And we don't talk very much about it. First of all, sex trafficking is much sexier. We have much more empathy
If
for,
we can call it that, yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a little bit more of a public issue that we're welcoming. We don't want to hear that the person that made the beautiful shirt that I'm wearing was a 10-year-old and they got paid a dime an hour. I mean, it's just hard to stomach. And
Right.
so we see labor trafficking in our own communities, and most of the people who are victims of labor trafficking don't have the language for what's happening to them and don't know who to report it to. In many countries,
Hmm.
law enforcement is not friendly.
Right.
They don't know to go to law enforcement and say, look, I'm working on this construction job and I haven't been paid in 2 months and I'm living in a van and they're feeding me once a day. I need help. They don't know who to go to. So one of the
Right.
things that we're doing out of our office, because no one else is doing it, is that one of my staff, his name's Bandoc Lull, and he's amazing, is going to start doing street outreach for labor trafficking here in our community, going to Home Depots and Walmart parking lots and just giving people their rights, letting people know that if
Hmm.
these things have happened to them, that there are people to talk to. He and I wrote a paper where it's submitted for publication about child labor. We've had child labor trafficking cases in our country. That's the one where it's almost completely foreign-born victims, children that were brought
Okay.
into the country, tricked by people usually from their own countries into
Mhm.
labor trafficking. So we do see that the majority in labor trafficking being foreign born.
Oh my goodness. Well, how about some good news? Um, I think it's important. It's essential that we talk about these things, but um, let's give our audience some good news. Can you tell us about this organization you founded, Phoenix Starfish Place?
So Phoenix Starfish Place is in 2016, there was some pretty big transition money from the Obama administration that talked about getting rid of transitional housing and really focusing on shelter and then permanent supportive. And
Mhm.
so the building that we're in was a transitional housing program. It was built in 2015 for $2 million. It's gorgeous. It has 15 apartments. They all have hardwood floors and all the appliances, really beautiful, in a center courtyard that's green and gorgeous, and a covered outdoor area and a big grill, and then a huge community center with a demonstration kitchen and a huge area and a daycare center, and then 3 rooms. One's a library and 2 therapy rooms. And so the city came to me and said, "Hey, Dominique, do you know enough people who have been trafficked that could use a place to live and have children?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I did not know anything about public housing, and I sure have learned. So in November of 2017, we opened. We have always been full except for the first few months. We have almost no turnover, which means that people are safe and happy, which is nice. We do, want people to move on and be successful. So we have 15 women and there are 32 children. Some families have 7 children, some families have 1 children. Um, and what we do is we try to have a holistic healing program. So we have dialectical behavioral therapy, we have trauma focused therapy, and then I have a chef that comes in every other week and talks about nutrition and food and how to buy food and how to make kale salad, and it's lovely. And then just a couple months ago, we opened an acupuncture clinic there every other Tuesday. So really trying to
Nice.
introduce, healing looks so different for each of us, how
Yes.
we get past the things that have happened to us.
Yes.
And so we want to open the opportunity. So I'm always looking for volunteers to come in and teach something or
Mhm.
lend a hand to our clients. You can teach knitting and crocheting, or you can teach how to have a powerful voice. It doesn't really matter. And of course, we'll take anything from toy donations to cash. We're really not selective.
Mhm.
Um, so we think it's really important that people feel like they're part of this anti-trafficking community, that it's
Mhm.
not an exclusive group of people, that each of us has our voice. So I have the tools to run a clinical program. I don't have the tools to run the HUD part. Someone else has to do that, and someone else has to do the acupuncture because I sure can't do that. So it takes a village.
So, for all of our audience listeners, if you have a heart for this or you know someone who has a heart for this, again, go to the program notes. I'll have all of Dominique's contact information there. Several things I still want to ask, and where time is fleeting by. I could talk to you for ages on this. What about your fleeting sensations of success? I know from other far less severe situations where I've contributed my time and energy, that without those fleeting moments of success, the will just can't keep going. How do you find fleeting moments of success in such a devastating arena?
It's a super good question. I work with people who have survived. We call them survivor leaders, who are some of the most interesting, strongest, beautiful, uh, thoughtful people that I know. And I keep them in my life. I keep them
Mm,
around me. And it reminds me every day that I need to do this. I don't do it every day all the time. I try to find some balance. My favorite thing to do right before the pandemic, we did it for a year. We ran a therapy group on trauma and trafficking in our women's jail here in Phoenix. And the ability to teach people the language of their own life, not tell them what happened or tell them what to do, or not impose my values or my experiences on them, just to give them language to what that was so incredibly powerful. We worked with about 70, I think 74 women in a year.
mhm,
And I feel like the seeds that were planted are incredibly important. And it gives me great pleasure to feel like even just one thing that I can do can make a person feel heard, or help a
mhm.
person get rid of a memory, or something like that.
Right, right. Any teachers listening, parents, aunties, volunteer aunties like me, what are the red flags that we can look for? And what are the red flags that those closest to the children should be looking for?
So unfortunately, lots of times kids hide what's happening. We know that.
Mhm,
So we really need to be paying attention. So some red flags are having things that they shouldn't have, right? So if a child shows up with something that's much more valuable than any money they have, a teacher could say, "Wow, where'd that purse come from? That's really beautiful." And they said, "Oh, my boyfriend, bought it for me." And sort of some red flags about things that we find that kids are often trafficked for things they want and things they need. So she
mm,
wanted that purse, but sometimes
mhm,
they need something. Maybe if someone offered her $100 and she knew her mom was $100 short on rent that month, that's something she needs. So looking out for things. Sometimes kids have two phones. Sometimes they use language like the game or the life is what the prostitution life, the
mhm,
trafficking situations are called.
mhm,
Um, Being with someone who's significantly older than them romantically,
mhm.
um, recruiting other kids, and just really not having good boundaries. And we do know, of course, that substance use is a big um, risk, because if I'm a college professor and I could not sustain a good meth addiction, right? I think, let's be realistic.
That's right.
You oftentimes run out of things to steal or things to sell, and it
That's right.
comes down to your body and what you can do. So with kids who are using substances, it's such a quick slide. The recruitment is very short, the grooming is very short.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
talk to your kids, get them to know that they can protect their friends. Don't say, "I'm worried someone's going to traffic you." Say, "I heard about this thing. I have this beautiful brochure that Dominique Sepowitz made. It's not available on her website at ASU Stir. Let's
That
go
will be in the program notes.
let's go through it, and let's think about, if one of your friends comes to you and says, a guy offered her $100 to take her shirt off. What do you and I do to help that friend of yours?" And you problem solve and you say, "Okay, what about this? Guy walks up to you at a mall and he says, 'I got a $500 gift card on the radio today. You want to spend it with me?' What would you do?" And it's funny, I told my brother the story and he was like, "I'll do it." And I was like, "No, don't do it. It's going to trick you. You owe him $500. And he's like, "Oh, I'm a boy. I didn't think of it." And so
And
we
that's a good point. Let's stop right there. This is not just talking to your girl children.
sure.
This is about, maybe your daughter's best friend is a boy. My best friends were always boys when I was young because I was more rough and tumble than those little sissy girls. And to remember that boys are regularly trafficked. But please continue. I just wanted to highlight that point for our audience.
And one of the biggest, there are two things that we see that are very common. One is that a child is running away over and over.
Mm,
That's probably the biggest red flag. And then another red flag we're doing research on now is being lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer has this disproportionate risk. And we think some of it is because those kids are kicked out more often. They might have religious differences with their family members. They may have more conflict. They may use drugs more. So LGBTQI and being a runaway are two of our biggest red flags.
So,
It,
audience, love your LGBTQI kids, not just because you don't want them trafficked, but because they're your kids. Sorry, Dominique, I have to throw my commercials in as we go.
So we really talk about talking. So I talk about as a therapist, which I am. I talk to families about talking to their kids in the car. They make sure they don't have headphones in. Sit and talk to them all the way to school, all the way to the grocery store.
Love that. Captive audience.
Captive audience. Usually their bellies are full. They're a little bit more attentive, but give them scenarios. What would happen if you were standing outside a bathroom and a guy grabbed you? What are you going to do? Scream. What if you see your friend? What are you going to do? Who are you going to tell? And giving kids tools that, I've worked with so many people who said, I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to tell. I thought that was happening to my sister, but I just didn't know. And I didn't know what to do.
Right.
And so if we can kind of prep kids to be the guardians of their friends, to love their friends, and keep them safe. It's not just the parents. It's not just the teachers, right? It's a community watching these kids and keeping them safe.
And actually, the kids are going to have more insight to what the other kids are doing. And I really appreciate your strategy of a parent sitting down with their kid to talk about this to help their friends. Because we all know, you sit down and you want to tell your kid how to keep themselves safe, and they may be nodding and smiling, but their ears are closed. But all of a sudden, if it becomes a team sport,
and it gives you permission to love your friends and to look out for your friends.
That's right.
In a very different way. And it also, that's how we've done sexual violence prevention in college for years. We don't ever say like, that night you went to you're going to go get drunk at the fraternity house. This is what you should do after you get sexually assaulted. We say, what are you going to do when your roommate comes home?
Right.
Tells you she's been sexually assaulted. Here are the tools for you, but it protects you too. You gain the skills, but it's in this very peer supportive way. It's not aggressive. And it feels like what we all need, which is that we do something helpful for other people.
And then we have someone looking over our shoulder who is a peer. They're going to get away with it more than a parent's going to get away with it. You told me a story that I found incredibly poignant and incredibly illuminative in terms of understanding the stigma that people that have been trafficked experience and the ongoing nature of it. Can you tell the brother's story?
Sure. So I have a brother who I love very much. He's a little bit older than me and we've been friends forever, and he's single and I love him, and I'd love for him to find just the love of his life. And this is really the only story I know that really captures stigma in a way that I feel like all of us can understand. So I'd like for you to think about, so he's wonderful. He gives presents to my kids. He loves my husband. He's a good man. So I'd like for you to think of him coming to me and saying, Dominique, I have met the love of my life. She is beautiful and smart. And when I'm with her, I'm a better person. When she was 15, she had a boyfriend and he beat her and beat her and beat her. And her parents figured it out after a little while and pulled her out of that situation and got her the therapy she needed. And she's doing great. Would you like to meet her? And we'd all say, yeah, she's a warrior. She's great, right? She's so strong. And sure, domestic violence, we know a lot about that. So now I'd like for you to think about your brother, who you love, who you want to find happiness, who's been lonely or alone. And he comes to you and he says, I have found the woman of my dreams. When I'm with her, I'm so happy. She's beautiful and smart and funny. When she was 15, she met a guy and he beat her and beat her and beat her. And he sold her to 300 people for sex. Would you like to meet her? And I think we can all say, gosh, there's just a hitch, right? There's like a hesitancy. And I think we all have to acknowledge that there's something about that sex part that makes it uncomfortable. And I've worked with many people in the community. We recently had a woman respond to the question, like, what's the difference to you? And she said, well, I'm fine having that person as a client, but as a family member, it might be dangerous. And so really blaming the victim for her
blaming
situation.
the victim, blaming,
and that's
victim
where we
shaming.
Are.
Yes.
That's still where we are. We've come a long way, but man, do we have a lot of work to do. And in some states, including Hawaii, there are very, very few people who will publicly talk about their victimization. And we've really destigmatized domestic violence, right? We have coalitions, and survivor groups and leaders. And in Arizona, we're very strong for survivor leaders, but in most states, we are not. And that is because it's laden with shame. Right. So I know people who work in the field who sort of whisper to me and say, like, I just want you to know that I'm a survivor, but I'm never going to say this publicly. And I think that must be devastating.
Yes. Yeah. Because to the degree that I will never say this out loud to anyone, they're still in that same place. They're still in that hole. They're still in the hole. Yeah. So
we've got to change that. We've got to make it not about the girl. So we've got to make it about the buyer who needs to stop buying. We need to make it about the trafficker who has to stop their behavior. And if we can stop one child from being trafficked, one child from that predator getting them to meet them at the Circle K just once, right? If all of us did it just once, we paid attention, we listened, we were looking, we were working at the Circle K and something looks funny and I know to call law enforcement. That's how each of us can help. Yes. And
women, we know what it looks like. We know what it feels like. We have not all been trafficked. We've all been much more fortunate. Most of us have been, or many of us have been more fortunate than that, but we know what a predator looks like. So I invite everyone to just start paying a little bit more attention. It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of our lives because I have to get to the post office, then I've got to pick up that dry cleaning because then I'm going to a party Saturday, and then I have to get to the grocery store, and oh my gosh, I forgot about such and such and so, and to just slow down for a purpose. Just slow down a little bit. Notice the kids. What's going on around you? Dominique, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for spending a huge amount of time last week educating me. And I know I will be looking at different things in different ways at this time. And thank you on behalf of all of those future survivors who you are out there waging war for every day. And for the audience, go to the website, lesliemichaels.com, click on podcasts, go down to Dr. Dominique Rowe Sepowitz. Check out her program notes. Check out all of the information she's going to be sharing. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, check out the video. We had some fun here today, even though we were talking about something that's very, very, very serious and important. You didn't hear it completely. It didn't pick up on the video. We didn't say enough about it. Drop that in the comments, and someone from my office will read that. They will forward that to Dominique, and she'll get in touch with you. Thank you very, very much. And I just want to remind you, you are smarter and wiser than you know.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you received inspiration for expanding your own social innovation and influence. Help us inspire others by sharing this episode and leaving your comments over at lesliemichaels.com/podcast. For more tips, insights, and support in creating a fully audacious, professional, and personal lifestyle you love, visit our Women We Should Know community on Facebook.